I've always told myself that when I get a place of my own, I'm going to get a riding lawnmower. That way, I don't have to push or walk behind a mower ever again. The reason was that it would be easier, faster, and of course, it'd be like driving my car, but just around the yard. However, after having a couple of these over the years, I've come to the realization that owning one of these isn't all that it's cracked up to be, and that I think the marketing may have been lying to me all this time. It's not as fun or as easy, and it certainly didn't save me any time or money. In today's video, we look at this John Deere riding mower, and the issue is that it needs a new deck belt because it shredded the one that was on there. Also, the engine only wants to stay running when in full choke, so I need to replace the carb as well. Now, I've already fixed this riding mower, and if you want to see that video, there should be a link to it at the top of the screen or at the end of the video. And I'm just going to use the video as a background while I talk about some of the misconceptions and the harsh realities of owning a riding lawnmower like this one. Now, this obviously is just from my own observation, but I don't see how this could be far off from anybody else's. I'm pretty sure I can remember the first riding mower I ever picked up. I saw an online ad for a fairly new one that wasn't all that expensive. I mean, they were practically giving it away for almost nothing. When I got there, the home was situated on almost an acre of land with a lot of trees, so I could understand why they needed one of these. Now, my yard was only about a quarter of theirs, so I knew it was going to be a bit overkill, but the time I was going to save would be worth all this effort. However, after having one, I might want to change that answer. After introducing myself, we walked over to the shed and got the mower out to look at it. Now, I didn't ask why they were getting rid of it because sometimes it's better just not to ask, otherwise you might be getting into their personal business. If I recall, it had a Kohler single-cylinder engine making about 20 horsepower or so. Now, it did have a serious issue. The battery was still good, but when turning the key, the engine would make one revolution and then stop. Now, if you're unaware, for some reason, the valve lash on these particular engines are prone to going out of spec. If that happens, especially on the exhaust valve, the starter will spin the engine once and then typically stop as it tries to fight the engine compression. I don't think they were aware of it, and that might have been the reason why they were getting rid of it, although if I didn't know much about small engines, I would have thought the battery was just dying or the starter was getting weak. After using some starter fluid and helping to turn the engine to get past the compression stroke, we finally coaxed it into life. I then drove it around the yard and tried out the blades, and everything worked great. And after paying them, I loaded it into the back of the truck and drove home. I think it took a couple of days before I was able to get back to it, and the first thing on my list was to check the valve lash, and sure enough, the exhaust rocker arm was far too loose. I then set it back to spec, jumped on it, started it up with no problems, and drove it around the yard. Now, this was during winter, so I didn't need to cut the grass. However, there were a lot of leaves in the yard, so I decided to mow them into the lawn. Now, because I was on a large riding mower with a fair amount of power, I thought it would do a pretty decent job of mulching the leaves, but I soon realized I had a serious issue. Now, the leaves that were in my yard had come from my neighbor's tree, and the type of leaves it has is very tough and waxy, sort of like a magnolia leaf but a lot smaller. The issue was that the mower blades were having a tough time mulching them beyond a certain size. Now, the pieces were small, but they were still bigger than I wanted them to be. I did have the mowing deck set all the way down, so the only thing I could come up with was that it needed mulching blades. The other thing that would have helped out would have been to have a block-off plate for the discharge chute to maximize mulching. Now, it really wasn't the fault of the riding mower. It was just set up to cut down tall grass and throw it clear of the mower. The issue was now I had to buy 2 new blades and find a way to close off the discharge. Now, I didn't spend a lot of money getting the mower, so it wasn't a terrible issue to spend a few dollars on it, but for something like this, you would have thought you wouldn't need to go through all this hassle. So I ordered 2 new blades and found a steel plate I could use to block off the chute, and then next week I would try it again on the leaves that were still remaining in the yard. The next weekend came around and I got it out to use, and I was quite surprised by how much the blades and block-off plate did not help out. It turns out the leaves don't act the same way as grass clippings, and even though it was chopping them up, it was doing a better job of blowing the leaves away from the mowing deck. That meant I had to make multiple passes to get it to look somewhat decent. Now, there was one side effect that I wasn't prepared for though. The tires on the mower were also tearing up the grass, and because of the weight of the mower, if the ground happened to be damp, you could see where the tires had been. I really didn't think the tires would tear the yard up, but when the ground is not firm due to any moisture, it's probably best to leave the rider in the shed and just use the push mower with a bag. That way it'll at least pick up all the leaves and you don't have to worry about damaging the grass or the ground. So this was all new to me. I never thought there'd be all these issues until I started using the riding mower. I then decided to put it away until springtime, then I can start mowing some actual grass with it. Then we'll see if getting a riding mower for a small yard was going to be worth all this effort. Now, if you've been watching for any sort of time, you'll know that I don't always have the best of luck, and I hate to say it, but things only get worse from here. 3 short months fly right by, and the first growth is starting to show up in the yard. Now it's mainly weeds and flowers, but it's something I can finally mow down with my shiny, almost new riding lawnmower. Now in those 3 months, I did do some basic maintenance to it. I changed the oil and the oil filter. The blades are still new, so they're still sharp. I don't typically change the fuel and air filter unless I have a starting and running issue, but as soon as I started making my first pass, I realized I had a really big problem. Now, when I typically mow my yard, I'll go around the perimeter first and then start cutting across the yard. But if you didn't know this, riding mowers do not have a very good turning radius unless you have a zero-turn riding mower, which this was not. So I had a hard time negotiating the corners because of this problem. That meant I had to do a lot of trimming afterwards, but my steering woes weren't over yet. Not only did I have an issue making the corners as I started to make my passes, I soon realized that since I couldn't make tight turns, I had to make wider turns and alternate my lanes to make my mowing more efficient. In the end, I did have to make some extra passes over areas that I already mowed. That meant I was wasting time and my gasoline just to navigate my yard. So once I got done, I had to grab the string trimmer and started cutting the areas that the mower had missed, mainly in the corners and around the tree roots. So the idea that I was getting a riding mower to maximize my time and gasoline wasn't working out quite like I had planned it. Now after I got done, I knew that I had to come up with a plan to make this work better the next time I mowed, and it had better be a good one, otherwise there was no real point in having this riding mower. So about 2 weeks later, the weeds and flowers had come back, and I put my plan into action. The first thing that I did was to use the string trimmer to edge with around the curb, mailbox, and fence. Then I pulled out the push mower to make 2 passes around the perimeter. That way, I don't have to do as much trimming like I did the last time. Then I pulled out the rider, set the height, and started cutting with a new pattern that consisted of passes that weren't next to each other but 2 lanes over. I would then repeat the pattern, never overlapping unless needed. Now, this new method was very productive and fairly efficient too, but there were a few issues with it. First, it made me look a bit idiotic by having to use the push mower and then the riding mower. Then the other issue was that the strange pattern I was using to maximize my time on the mower made me look a bit lost in my own yard. What I mean by that is that since the yard isn't all that big and the mower is moving rather quickly, it just looked like I was doing the worst donuts in my own lawn. The worst part was that my strange mowing technique was easily noticed by those who happened to be outside. Not that it should matter to them, but it also made me realize that this really wasn't working out, at least in the front yard. So what about the backyard? Well, if you thought it looked strange in the front yard, the back wasn't going to be much better. At least there was less of a chance of someone seeing me, but it still felt somewhat unneeded doing it the way I was. So in the end, I decided that for my size yard, it simply didn't make any sense to have it. Now, I did use it periodically for the next year or so, but after that, I sold it to one of my many coworkers. I also realized that the parts for this mower, such as the belts, spindle, blades, and tires, would cost a lot when I had to replace them. That meant if I wanted to keep one of these around, I would have to buy aftermarket parts and not OEM parts. So my question is, if I gave you a riding mower at no cost, would you think it was going to work for your lawn or property? Unfortunately for me, it wasn't going to work for my front or backyard, but it would definitely work if I was living somewhere near the outskirts of town. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.